Alright, thank God it's fantasy football season. I'm Buster Brown, and the show is Redemption Rehab. If you tuned in today, it's for one reason. It's to start winning championships in fantasy football. Today, we're talking about my top picks on the weekly waiver wire that'll help you get the job done. So let's head over to the weekly waiver wire report
and check out the facts.
Alright, yeah! It's week 16 of the NFL season. Today, we're talking the waiver wire and who you should be picking up to help you win a championship in 2019. We've got some great players to choose from at all positions. If you need a quarterback, check. If you need a running back, got that covered. Wide receivers, tight ends, you know what? We got some defenses we really like that are probably on your waiver wire also. So do yourself a favor. Get out your popcorn, buckle up, and let's head over to the chalkboard
and check out the facts.
Okay, like we do every week, we always start out our waiver wire report with who we like at running back. And we always talk about the guys we mentioned last week. One of the guys you should have picked up was the San Francisco 49ers, Raheem Mostert, who had 13 rushes for 54 yards and a TD with one reception for 5 yards on 2 targets. Hey, the San Francisco 49ers look like the team to beat. They lost a tough game to Atlanta because they relaxed at the end of a game. Hey, they better not do that in the playoffs. They're going to get knocked out. But that could happen to you too. So guess what? Picking up players that we mentioned for 2 weeks before tonight, you should have picked up. Raheem Mostert was one of them because he's been scoring touchdowns and we've been recommending him for weeks. Another guy that's more of a sleeper pick that we mentioned last week is the Miami Dolphins' Patrick Laird, who had 12 rushes for 46 yards with 2 receptions for 8 yards on 8 targets. He's getting playing time. They play the Cincinnati Bengals in Florida. Cincinnati's giving up. So, hey, maybe you need a running back for this week. Because Dalvin Cook got hurt, maybe Detroit running backs you got, who knows? But the thing is, you got to get somebody in your lineup. This guy may fill the hole for you for a week to help you win a championship. He's a deep sleeper, but I think the Bengals have given up. And this guy may have a big game. He's trying to win a roster spot for next year. Let me give you some other running backs we mentioned last week that you should have picked up. Starting with the Kansas City Chiefs' Darwin Thompson, who had 2 rushes for 38 yards with 1 reception for 1 yard on 1 target. Look, Darwin Thompson's may not going to win you a championship, but he's someone we like to pick up just in case. You never know what could happen. Maybe they don't let half these running backs play that are veterans for Kansas City. This guy might get a lot of playing time and he might help you win a championship. He's a real deep sleeper. But let me give you some guys that you should be looking at this week in case you absolutely need a running back to win a championship. Starting with the Minnesota Vikings. The injury to Dalvin Cook, you should be picking up the handcuffs, and they are Mike Boone, who had 13 rushes for 56 yards and 2 TDs in week 15. Alexander Madison was inactive this week, but he's been the handcuff to Dalvin Cook all year. If you have Dalvin Cook on your roster and you're in a situation where you need a playoff game, you gotta pick up one of these guys. I'd pick them both up if you can. It's important. Why? Because if Dalvin Cook doesn't play, one of these 2 guys is probably going to get the call. Which one it is, I don't know. Good luck with that one. Let me give you some other people you should be looking at in week 16. And that's the Philadelphia Eagles running back Boston Scott, who had 6 rushes for 26 yards with a whopping 7 receptions for 61 yards on 7 targets. I mean, who else did the Eagles have? They got Miles Sanders, Jordan Howard's hurt, so you know Boston Scott's going to get the play. They got Jay Ajayi, who knows what's going on there, probably saving him for the playoffs. They have no wide receivers to throw the ball to, but we do have some wide receivers we like on Philadelphia we'll mention later. So this guy's worth picking up. If you need somebody to play this week, he might be one of the guys I'd be looking at to help you win a championship. Let me give you somebody else you should be talking about this week. Like the Detroit Lions running back Wes Hillis, who had 10 rushes for only 21 yards, but he had 2 TDs with 2 receptions for 1 yard on 2 targets. With the injuries to Bo Scarborough, we don't know who's going to be the running back, but he's worth picking up just for goal line carries. He clearly can't run the ball because he had 10 carries for 21 yards. But listen to this. They're talking about bringing back Kerryon Johnson. For the last couple games, he's been practicing for 3 weeks. I'd be surprised if they brought him back. But keep your eye out for Kerryon Johnson. And if you have to, this guy's a real deep sleeper. Not sure I would trust him, but keep your eye on Kerryon Johnson. Or go out and pick up Bo Scarborough. You never know. He's got a good matchup this week. So against Denver, it's going to be tough. If you need a running back and you're in a championship game, good luck. They're tough to find. But these are my best picks. Let's go over and check out some wide receivers you should be looking at in Week 16, the NFL season, to help you win a championship 2019. Okay. We're looking at wide receivers you should be taking a look at on your waiver wire to help you win a championship in Week 16. Starting with people we mentioned last week, and you should have picked this guy up, and that's the Tampa Bay Buccaneers' Rashard Perriman, who had 5 receptions for 113 yards and a whopping 3 touchdowns on 6 targets, and he had a rush for 5 yards. Hey, I'm going to tell you what. Chris Godwin, he got hurt. He's having an MRI tomorrow. He might not play. Justin Watson, that's who I'm looking at maybe getting some playing time. And Mike Evans, wouldn't count on him. They aren't making the playoffs, so why even put him out there? But there's another wide receiver that got hurt. His name is Scotty Miller. He had a good game against Detroit, but he's having an MRI today too. Man, they're running out of players to throw out there. Who's Jameis Winston going to throw the ball to? Tell you what, man, I'll be picking this guy up. Tell you who else I like is their tight ends. We'll talk about them later. Let me give you some other wide receivers you should be looking at this week, like Pittsburgh Steelers' Deontay Johnson, who had 5 receptions for 67 yards on 7 targets. We mentioned him last week and the week before and a half a dozen times this year. With the injuries to J.J. Smith-Schuster, James Washington, and Deontay Johnson are the guys to have. You don't know when J.J. Schuster's coming back. If it's this week or next, who knows? They're not going to jeopardize his career. But if you get a chance and he's on the waiver wire, go out and get Deontay Johnson, who we mentioned for weeks now. And you might want to consider James Washington. He looks like a player. I'd get both of them if I could. You never know. Here's some other wide receivers in case you didn't get the ones we mentioned the last weeks. Starting with the Jacksonville Jaguars' Chris Connolly, who had 4 receptions for 49 yards and 2 TDs on 8 targets. We do this thing called Daily Fantasy Football Strategies. That's our weekend show, and we tell you about DFS, where you can do things like FanDuel. We told you about Chris Connolly on that show. We told you with the injuries to DJ Chark, this guy was going to have a big day, and he got a couple touchdowns. Man, too bad you didn't pick him up and play him this week. But if you listen to our DFS shows on the weekends, you'd have got yourself some cash by picking up this guy. Let me give you some more wide receivers you should be looking at that we mentioned on our daily fantasy football show. And that's the Detroit Lions' Danny Amendola, who had 8 receptions for 102 yards on 13 targets. Look, with the injuries to Marvin Jones and TJ Hawkinson, Who else do they have to throw the ball to but Danny Amendola and Kenny Golladay? Well, teams like Tampa Bay took away Kenny Golladay this week, and they solely targeted Danny Amendola. He might be worth picking up in Week 16. Just because who else do they have to throw the ball to? They're putting people on injured reserve in Detroit every day. They've officially given up. I wouldn't expect a lot, but he might be the person to help you get you over the top to win a championship this year. Let me give you some other wide receivers to consider, because there's a lot of them. Like the Washington Redskins' Steve Sims, who had 5 receptions for 45 yards and a touchdown on 11 targets. Or how about the Philadelphia Eagles wide receiver Greg Ward, who had 7 receptions for 61 yards and a touchdown on 9 targets. Hey, look, these guys are deep sleepers, but teams at this time of year are looking for players who can play to help them next year. It just is what it is. Eagles have a bunch of injuries in the wide receiver, and the Redskins are checking out guys for next year. So keep an eye on these guys. And if you absolutely have to have a wide receiver, go out and pick one of these guys up. Might help you next week, or do it just to keep your opponent from getting one of them. Let me give you 2 more deep sleeper at wide receivers, because you never know, you may need one of them. And that's because of injuries in Tampa Bay, and one of them is the Tampa Bay Buccaneers' Justin Watson, who had 2 receptions for only 27 yards on 2 targets. But with the injuries to Mike Evans, Chris Godwin, and Scotty Miller, it's the Rashard Perriman show, the Justin Watson show, and they have 2 good tight ends in O.J. Howard, who hasn't lived up to his billing, and Cameron Brate, who they're paying a ton of money to. So I really like the tight ends. You should consider picking them up. We'll talk about that later. And a deep sleeper in Justin Watson. They got a bunch of injuries down there, so he might be somebody you want to consider. Let's head over and check out some of the tight ends we mentioned last week, starting with the Los Angeles Rams' Tyler Higbee, who had a whopping 12 receptions for 111 yards on 14 targets. He's getting a ton of playing time because of the injury to Gerald Everett. But you know what? We've been mentioning Tyler Higbee all year on our show. We've mentioned him last week. We've been telling you this guy's a player, and he produced again. Hopefully, you went out and picked him up, like we told you last week, and put him in your lineup. You're welcome. Let me give you some other tight ends you should be looking at this week. Like the Tennessee Titans' Jonnu Smith, who had 5 receptions for 60 yards on 5 targets. It's simple. The Titans like to throw the ball to the tight ends. Doesn't matter who the tight end is, they like to throw the ball to him. This guy's big, he's huge, and he can catch the ball. He caught all of his targets, man. He's probably going to score a touchdown this week because of the matchup. So if you get a chance and you need a tight end, maybe because yours is hurt or bad weather, in the playoffs, man, you can't be playing players in bad weather. Look what happened in Denver. Nobody scored basically because of the weather. So you have to keep that in mind. So if you've got a bad matchup because of weather, or you just need a tight end, you might want to consider Jonnu Smith. Be a deep sleeper. Let's look at a couple tight ends I mentioned earlier, but because of injuries, they could have a great week, like the Tampa Bay Buccaneers' O.J. Howard, who had 4 receptions for 46 yards on 8 targets. Or how about the Tampa Bay Buccaneers' Cameron Brate, who had 3 receptions for 33 yards on 7 targets. Because of injuries, these guys are going to get to play. Which one will have a big game? I think they got to take a look at O.J. Howard. I mean, they got to sign him. Something's got to happen there, or maybe even trade him at the end of the year. It depends. They've already got Cameron Brate signed, so they know what they got there. It'd be risky, but O.J. Howard may have his biggest game of the season this year. Glad I don't have that decision to make. But let's go take a look at some quarterbacks. Don't go into the playoffs with just 1 or 2 quarterbacks. I like to stack a lot of them. Not only to keep my opponent from getting one, but just in case weather plays a factor, I don't want to be left with no quarterbacks. So, here's some quarterbacks I like this week. Like, how about the Jacksonville Jaguars, Gardner Minshew, who plays the Atlanta Falcons. Atlanta's defense is getting better. They chase defensive coordinators, so this is a tough matchup. But Gardner Minshew might get it done. It's a real deep sleeper. I'm not sure how to trust him, but Atlanta gave up a lot of points earlier in the year. Let me give you another quarterback I like even better. He hasn't been very good, and he got benched. And that is the Cincinnati Bengals, Andy Dalton, versus the Miami Dolphins. I'd hate to risk my championship hopes on Andy Dalton. He's not even going to be with the team next year. But at this point, what else choices do you have? There's not going to be a lot of quarterbacks. Not like Ryan Tannehill's going to be sitting there. We've been mentioning him for weeks, so he's probably gone. And it's not like there's going to be a quarterback just sitting there for you to get. These are deep sleepers, and I wouldn't suggest you do it. But you know what? If you're in need, I would go out and pick up one of these guys, because at least they play in good weather against defenses that are questionable against the pass. Let me give you some defenses that you should be keeping an eye on this week, like the Atlanta Falcons versus the Jacksonville Jaguars. Atlanta's been improving, like I said earlier. I know I just mentioned Gardner Minshew, but boy, Atlanta could have a big day. I'm not sure I would pass on Atlanta playing Jacksonville. They've given up. They're not making the playoffs. They're going to be playing some other players just to see if they can play. Atlanta might be a good play at home this week. Let me give you one I like even more, and that is the Denver Broncos against the Detroit Lions. The Detroit Lions are putting everybody on IR because they're all hurt. So I'll tell you what, I think that Denver, who's playing probably their last home game this year, and the weather won't be good, I think they could have a big day against the Detroit Lions. So get him in your lineup if you need a defense, or maybe you just have a bad matchup. If you need a kicker, take my advice. Get a kicker that kicks indoors or in good weather. You don't want weather to play a factor. And another thing is, you should play a kicker that has a high point total projection, because they're going to get more chances to kick field goals than a kicker that has a low point projection. So check out the over-under when you get a chance in every game. Don't leave any stone unturned. We're trying to win a championship. So in summary, look, we've had a long year. We started with our draft summaries, who you should take. We did a good job with that. Hopefully you listened. We told you who to take all year on the waiver wire. We gave you some great picks. Hopefully it helped you. Now it's time to buckle down. Don't leave any stone unturned. We're trying to win a championship here. Don't settle for second. It sucks. I hate it. It's happened to me so many times I can't stand it. But winning a championship, there's no greater feeling in the world. Well, that's not true, but it's a good feeling anyways. I'm Buster Brown. The show's Redemption Rehab. Good luck.